A trusted voice of truth and light.
God gave me a gift. I shovel well. I shovel very well.
And a rally point for those who've accepted the reality that they are not sheep.
We've got a blind date with destiny.
And it looks like she's ordered the lobster.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there, and welcome to the show. Let's get this started, shall we? This is a place where we gather to revel in wrongthink. And what I mean by that is we simply challenge the prevailing narratives of our day and make up our own minds as to what is real and what isn't. Now, I know, that means, well, that sounds pretty subjective, you know. Who are you to determine what reality is? Now, I would actually ask the question, who are they, meaning the narrative managers, to tell you what reality is? Really? It's your mind. And I'm not telling you that you must agree with me, therefore you're no longer connected to reality. All I'm suggesting is there are a lot of forces out there that are trying to distract us, mislead us, or even just actively prevent us from seeing what is truth, what is real. My job is to help clear away some of that fog and at least give you a vantage point or multiple vantage points from which to assess the situation and make up your own mind. So, if these terms are agreeable, let's continue. I'm glad to have you here. By the way, I have great sponsors who make this show possible. They include Dixie Chiropractic. You can access them at dixiechiro.com, hslammo.com, sewingandquiltingcenter.com, monticellocollege.org, lifesavingfood.com, the Heather Turner team at Patriot Home Mortgage, and governyourcrypto.com. I think pretty much every day, as I sit down and I prepare my show notes and I'm thinking about, okay, what can I talk about? I'm always looking for what would be of greatest value. And there's some days where it's like, man, there is so much just craziness going on that I worry I'm just sitting here complaining. Or worse than that I'm sharing this stuff with you from the standpoint of someone who's just like, are you seeing this too? I'm not imagining this, right? This is what's really playing out in front of us. I guess what I'm admitting is there are times when I doubt my own sanity just because of the intense chaos that's going on around us. And it seems to be, building. And that seems pretty daunting. So I want to just take a little bit of a side journey here for a moment. And I'm speaking to those who recognize clearly that something's going on. That things are not, going exactly as they should be and all is well. I know there are some people who can maintain, what? Well, there's nothing here that concerns us. It's the meme of the dog sitting there in a burning, restaurant with flames all around him, with a cup of coffee in front of him, and he's saying, this is fine. It's not fine. And I think we all recognize that. But if we're just sitting there wringing our hands or just complaining about what we see, what are we really accomplishing? I'm asking this more of myself than I am of you, but do you see the difference? It's not enough just to identify society's problems. Anybody can do that. Any heckler can sit there and point out, this is what I see that's wrong. You can sit there and make catcalls from the sidelines all you want. However, if you are serious about being a problem solver, you've got to get on the field. And this is where I find a lot of people struggle because it's, well, what can I do? The thinking of our time is so dominated by politics that for a lot of people, they feel like, well, maybe I need to run for office. And we need good people in office. But at the same time, we also need to lessen our dependence on the state, including elected office, to mitigate the various problems around us. I've got an article here in front of me from Ron Ross. This was published on Intellectual Takeout. No, it wasn't. It was AmericanThinker.com. Sorry. They're both great sites, but I want to send you to the right place. And there is a link to this article in my show notes. The one place where you can really make a difference is the title of this article. And he starts by invoking Jordan Peterson's 6th rule of life. Set your own house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Now, Ron Ross says, you determine your life primarily by the choices you make. Some choices are meta choices, ones that impact numerous other choices. And one of the meta choices is what share of your time you devote to your micro realm versus your macro realm. Now, the micro realm of our lives includes family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, those with whom we directly interact, as well as your job and other personal uses of your time. The macro part of our lives, that includes society at large, the economy, climate change, politics, people distant from you, and people you don't know. Now, Ron Ross asks, in which of these two realms, micro or macro, do you want to live? And he says, keep in mind, you have a limited amount of time and energy. Whichever realm you choose has what economists call an opportunity cost. Now, the MIT Dictionary of Modern Economics defines opportunity cost like this. Perhaps the most fundamental concept in economics, the opportunity cost of an action is the value of the foregone alternative. That's a great definition. Ron Ross says there's an enormous difference regarding the level of control you have in these two spheres. Obviously, you have the most influence and impact on those closest to you. And influence is like gravitational force, inversely proportional to the square of the distance. Also consider the relative populations. You're a significant part of your micro world. Like it or not, you're a tiny and insignificant part of your macro world. Now, he says there's also a big difference in your relative knowledge about the two realms. Your macro realm is vastly more complex than your micro realm, and the choices you make there are more prone to error. We all know people who have strong opinions concerning issues they know almost nothing about. Half the time, I think that's me, by the way. Ron Ross says virtually all your power resides in your micro realm. The person closest to you is yourself. So focusing on a small sphere of influence is an aspect of individual responsibility. It's a way of thinking and behaving that shows the difference between progressives and conservatives. Conservatives love being personally responsible. That's part of the price of freedom. Unfortunately, individual responsibility is just too big a burden for some people. Personal problems are often too difficult or too painful to face, and to focus instead on an urgent macro issue is a favorite self-deluding tactic of progressives. Kind of like systemic racism, right? They see it everywhere, in everyone. Injustice. They can spot it a mile away, except in themselves. Funny how that works. Ron Ross says their selected macro issue is typically one dire enough to blind them to the cost of hiding from themselves. It enables them to deny the high opportunity cost to themselves of neglecting their own unsolved personal problems. Now that's it. That's pretty much it. That's straight up. There's your, 1,000 milligrams of red pill. But I want to unpack this just a little bit further. And I want to do this because I believe you are a problem solver, and I certainly want to be a problem solver as well. I think there's great wisdom in what Ron Ross has written here. And it starts with real leadership. Starts with using your influence as wisely as you can wherever you happen to be at the moment. Now, I'm guessing most of us don't have a big, prominent national stage that's well lit and, well covered by the media, or for that matter, even, negatively covered by the media. Nope. But we do have very distinct spheres of influence. And I agree with him entirely that the most powerful sphere of influence we have starts with ourselves and then extends out to the people who are closest to us, and then the circle grows a little bit wider within our home, within our neighborhood, within our church community, within our actual community. You see how that works. But I also like his point that getting yourself in order first is a necessity. Now, this doesn't mean you have to be perfect. You have to be absolutely beyond reproach. But at some level, could we not agree that maybe this means getting yourself squared away to the point where you at least know who you are and you know what you stand for? It just seems like that would be a very helpful position to start from, with the understanding you can't lift someone any higher than you yourself happen to be. If you're trapped in a pit, trapped by habits, whatever it may be, you're not going to be able to help people, if you yourself are stuck. I hope this doesn't sound like I'm being patronizing, because, like I said, this is as much a message for me as it is for anybody. But if we focus first on getting our own hearts in order, and by that I mean, understanding who we are, what it is that we actually believe in strongly enough that it would motivate how we act and what we do on a daily basis. Start there. Watch that influence spread to the people closest to you. And as they get it together, you'll see that influence continue to spread. It's like ripples in a pond. You'll know you're doing it right when you see people starting to come to you looking for advice. And it's not because you're all that in a bag of chips. It's because they see that you're actively trying to take that responsibility.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Once again, welcome back to the show. Glad you could join us. Now, look, my message of liberty has been consistent, as you know, if you have been listening for the many years that I've been doing this program. I love the message of liberty. And this is why when I'm around people who embrace libertarianism, I always feel a little bit more at home. And I'm very happy to welcome Dr. C. Ronald Kimberling, who is one of the editors of a remarkable book that I've had the opportunity to read called Libertarianism. This is John Hosper's The Libertarian Party's 50th anniversary and beyond. Dr. Kimberling, I'm first of all glad to have you on the show. Tell us just a little bit about yourself, and then let's talk a little bit about libertarianism itself. I hate to admit this, but I didn't even realize the 50th anniversary had come and gone.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brian, and please just call me Ron. My own saga was my student days. I started college way back in 1967, and that was the time of, student riots and major protests and things like that. I became active in the Young Americans for Freedom, which is a conservative group started by William F. Buckley at his home in Sharon, Connecticut in 1960. But many of us, particularly those of us who lived in California, started reading more about the libertarian philosophy and, searching for a government that got back to the original principles of the Constitution. Richard Nixon was president from 69 to 74, and Nixon did certain things. He started the Environmental Protection Agency. He imposed wage and price controls, which hadn't been imposed since World War II, and a lot of other things that those of us who were in favor of free markets and free minds, we could not stomach that. So we kind of broke away and started a bunch of libertarian groups, and they're all, they're in a chapter in the book on it's called Flowers in Our Hair, kind of an homage to the 60s. But I was part of that movement. And, I got my PhD at USC, actually in English, not in political science, remained politically active. I supported Ronald Reagan. In fact, there's an interview with Reagan in this book, and he specifically states, this is back in 1975, specifically states that libertarianism is the heart and soul of conservatism. People ought to read that essay. So I worked for Reagan. I got appointed to a political position in 1981 in the U.S. Department of Education, and I rose through, several political appointments. I became assistant secretary for higher ed, which is the highest-ranking federal official for colleges and universities. And I detail in the book, in one chapter, some suggestions for how to abolish the Department of Ed. That's what I went there to do, and we didn't accomplish it for a number of reasons. But it's still a worthwhile goal, I think. Phil Crane was a congressman from the Chicago suburbs for many, many years. He was known as a conservative, but he was very libertarian in his views. And I remember hearing Phil Crane say the federal government should be reduced to 4 cabinet agencies: the Department of Defense, the Department of the Treasury, the Department of State for Foreign Relations, and the Justice Department, period. Everything else, let's abolish. Let's figure out, why we either don't need them or do it on the state level. So anyway, the idea for this book, Brian, is that the 50th anniversary was coming up of two very salutary events in libertarian history. One was the 50th anniversary of the publication of a book with the simple title, Libertarianism, A Political Philosophy for Tomorrow. That was written by Professor John Hospers, who was the head of the philosophy department at the University of Southern California, and major work of political philosophy. It sold millions of copies and still in print. And as a result of that and other activities, the Libertarian Party was created formally in Colorado in December of 1971, and John Hospers became the first Libertarian candidate for president. Now, they were only on the ballot in a couple of states, but surprisingly, Hospers got one electoral vote. So it's a footnote in history. There was a Nixon elector from Virginia named Roger McBride, who didn't like the things Nixon was doing, felt that he had strayed from the Constitution and free market, and he voted for Hospers. He also voted for Hospers' running mate, a woman named Toni Nathan. She was the first woman and the first Jew to get an electoral vote in history. And the party has lasted more than 50 years. It's the largest third party in the country. It's been on the ballot in all 50 states in the last two elections. It looks like it's here to stay.
Let me pose a quick question to you, Ron, because I know that a criticism I commonly hear from conservative corners is, well, if libertarianism is so great, how come they aren't winning more elections? And I'd like to have you comment to the idea that success can be defined in more than just simply putting people into office, can't it? I mean, my love of freedom directly stems from my interactions with libertarians who took me under their wing along the way and helped me on my journey to discover, why the non-aggression principle and why personal liberty are superior ways to live life. But it didn't take somebody getting elected for me to make that connection.
Right. Well, I think there's two or three reasons. One is that the Libertarian Party has grown, particularly in the last decade, in elected officials. There are currently more than 300 elected libertarians around the country. Now, most of those are local offices, but you have to start somewhere. You have to get experience somewhere. There's a state legislator in Michigan. Wyoming. And he's had a very, very powerful influence. In fact, he is a minority party caucus of one, but he works well with Democrats on issues that there's alignment between the libertarian viewpoint and their viewpoint. He works well with Republicans when there's alignment there. So I think what I see happening is that things have gotten so polarized with the major parties, and libertarianism represents a third alternative. And I think there were about half a dozen states in the 2020 election where the Libertarian presidential candidate Joe Jorgensen won sufficient votes that it made the difference between whether Biden or Trump won that state. So I think the influence is starting off at the local level and with kind of a wedge influence. And more and more, I think if independents, who are about a third of the voters in the United States, decide that libertarianism is the true independent philosophy in politics, that it's going to grow more.
Ron, is there a way to sum up libertarianism? I mean, I don't usually speak in bumper sticker slogans, but if there's a central idea to libertarianism, what would that be?
People should have the freedom to do anything they want so long as it's peaceful and doesn't interfere with somebody else's freedom. And, years ago they used to say libertarians believed that the government should stay out of the boardroom and out of the bedroom.
Okay, there doesn't need to be much more. I mean, that's a great philosophy to begin with. Unfortunately, a lot of people still are in the process of learning why it's a very viable way of seeing the world. We have to take a very quick commercial break. Again, my guest is Dr. C. Ronald Kimberling. We will be back to talk with Ron. We're going to talk about some specific essays within this book, and I think you'll be surprised at the variety of voices that also have embraced the libertarian ideal. We'll be back right after this.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Welcome back to the show. Again, I'm visiting today with Dr. C. Ronald Kimberling, and we're talking about a book which he co-edited along with Stan Oliver called Libertarianism, John Hosper's The Libertarian Party's 50th Anniversary and Beyond. And Ron, I'd like to take some time to just to talk about the book itself. This is not, this is not a pamphlet. There's some very serious food for thought in here, but what could a person expect to find if they pick up this book and start reading? What are they going to encounter?
Okay. Well, the book basically has 5 parts. So the first part are former students of Professor Hosper's and their memories of him as a professor, as a teacher. It's, again, celebrating the 50th anniversary of his book on libertarianism. So that was the first thing. Then there's a series of essays that provide a bit of history of libertarianism. Now, this is not the comprehensive textbook, okay? So you've got quite a bit of variety. You've got one of my former students, Louise Hitchcock, is a professor of anthropology in Australia, and she wrote about the seafaring people in ancient Mediterranean times during the Bronze Age, who were free traders. And they weren't making war; they were trading. So it goes there. It talks about. There's an interview with Ronald Reagan conducted in 1975 in Reason magazine. He had just left the governorship before running for president. There's a very interesting essay on the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, which was passed a few years back. And it forbids the Justice Department and the federal government from interfering in state decisions when it comes to legalization of marijuana, particularly, well, actually, this act was medical marijuana. So there's a smattering of different articles. Then there's histories of the Libertarian Party, including the first call to action to create a Libertarian Party in 1971 by David F. Nolan, who was the founder of the party. Then the fourth section of the book is called Libertarian Perspectives. And those are some of those interesting essays that you alluded to. Some stuff about how the government's messed up the COVID response. There's immigration essays. And the former presidential candidate in 2020 of the Libertarian Party, Dr. Joe Jorgensen, talks about building a truly free market in healthcare. And then finally, there's a section kind of looking at what the future of the Libertarian Party might be. And it includes a chapter on slashing the ballot access laws that prohibit third parties from running candidates, how the Libertarian Party can make alliances with both the left and the right, and a few other things. So it's chock full of nuts, I guess, would be the way to describe it.
Speaking of nuts, and I say that tongue in cheek here, I was actually happy to see commentator Glenn Beck has an essay in their open letter to James Madison. And I only point this out because I know that a lot of people within my audience very much resonate with Glenn Beck, especially my Southern Utah listening audience. I affectionately refer to him as Brother Beck for reasons that they would understand. But
I understand.
There's a very libertarianism is not nearly as dogmatic or narrowly focused as the other two parties. But Ron, it seems like the other two parties always seem to have the advantage when it comes to actually securing elected positions in government. Why is it that they have this advantage?
Well, just one example, and I don't have the exact statistics, but let's say that you're trying to run for a seat in the House of Representatives in the state I live in, Illinois. If you are seeking the nomination of a major party and getting your name on a primary ballot, you need about 5,000 signatures. If you are seeking the nomination and ballot access from a third party, you need about 25,000. So it takes time, money, effort, cost, to get all of those signatures. That's just one example of the kind of barriers they put up. But there's a lot of them.
Well, it seems like the system very carefully allows you just enough of a choice that it doesn't actually have to change anything about itself, regardless of whether it's a Democrat or a Republican who wins. And so I think that's a compliment to libertarians and even to other third parties, but especially, to the Libertarian Party. It seems to pose a real threat in the sense that if people are interested in something more than just the status quo of big government getting bigger and taking more control in our lives, you have alternatives, but there are some significant barriers to get past.
You do. And I think there are some elections, and this would be good targeting for the Libertarian Party, where it's pretty much a one-party district, whether it's a Democratic district or a Republican district. It's so strongly one party. Many times the other party doesn't even choose to run a candidate. Well, if libertarians run for those offices and they make a pitch for, number one, the support of the people who otherwise would have voted for the other party. So let's say hypothetically it's a Democratic district and through, you make a pitch that there's a lot of common ground with the Republicans, particularly in economics and the size of government and that kind of thing. And then you go after the independent voters who, an independent point of view really leans toward libertarian. Well, you might put together a coalition of those two that actually outpoll the major party candidate running in that dominant district. I think that's a strategy for the Libertarian Party to go for.
There's an essay in the book by Mary Ruwart, Why a Libertarian World is Inevitable. Now, I have to tell you, that actually struck a note of optimism in my soul. I was like, liberty is a great idea. That idea that people should be free to do anything peaceful that does not infringe on others, that should be the key to a better, more prosperous world. Tell me, in your opinion, Ron, how likely are we to see the world to move toward that? Right now, things are not looking very hopeful in some respects.
Well, I'm optimistic about one aspect of this current war in the Ukraine, and that is nations that believe in, they'll use the term democracy, but basically where there are more freedoms given to individual citizens than you find in autocracies. That dialogue has resumed, and I haven't heard that kind of a dialogue since, 60s or 70s. So I think that's helping. I think, COVID has given people isolation and time to rethink their positions and change their mind on things.
It's also given us a very clear example of what too much government might look like, hypothetically.
Amen. And Mary has another chapter in the book that talks about that. Now, this book was written during the earlier phase of the pandemic, but she has a doctorate in biomedical research. She has had significant interaction with the FDA over the years. And she's highly critical of the FDA and the way that they have handled the COVID situation.
Let's take a moment here. We got about 90 seconds left. Let's talk about the book, where it's available. Where would you direct people if they're interested in getting their hands on this book?
The publisher is called Jameson Books, Jameson. People could Google that and order it from their website, or they could just go on Amazon and look it up. Just enter Libertarianism, John Hosper's The Libertarian Party's 50th Anniversary and Beyond. That's a long title. They could try my name, C. Ronald Kimberling, and it might pop up there. And they can buy it on Amazon, or they could buy it from the publisher.
Are there any issues, we're down to about our last minute here, but are there any issues or any political races that you're particularly keeping an eye on, which could prove to show that libertarianism is in fact, an idea whose time has come?
I'm keeping my eye on the state legislative races in the state of Wyoming. I mentioned earlier that there is an elected libertarian in the Wyoming legislature, but they're actually running a set of candidates and targeting specific legislative seats with the hope that they can increase that number from 1 to 4, 5, 6, and just have a real presence in Wyoming. And Wyoming is a state that leans toward liberty anyway. It's the good old West.
Ron, it's been great talking with you. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for a wonderful read in this book.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Quick shout out here to sewingandquiltingcenter.com. Now, they are located in St. George, Utah, but if you are someone who is in the market for a sewing machine, embroidery machine, long arm quilting machine, these are the folks I would send you to. And if it's not you, you probably know someone who is into utilizing these skills. Sewingandquiltingcenter.com would like me to remind you that this Friday, actually today and tomorrow, April 8th and 9th at the Dixie Center in St. George, there is a quilt show being put on by the Dixie Quilt Guild. Now, you can go and you can appreciate quilts. That's fine. But you could also get your hands on a handy quilter long arm quilting machine at no charge and see how it does. In other words, they have 4 of them set up there. So if you want to, put it to the test, see how they work, you can actually get a summarized hands-on demonstration and also get the best prices of the year. Now, if you can't make it to the Dixie Center, go visit their store on Bluff Street in St. George for amazing 2-day-only prices. It's time to get the machine that you've been dreaming of. And I'm just going to throw this out there, too. I don't want to make it sound like, a sewing machine is a doomsday item. But if you're serious about your self-reliance, it's probably something that you should add to your tools and to your skills of being able to repair or even manufacture your own clothing. And they fix the old machines. They teach people how to use nearly every machine made for home use, even the competition's machines. Sewingandquiltingcenter.com. There's a link in the show notes. Check it out. You'll appreciate it. They'll appreciate hearing from you. So as much as it feels like COVID mania has passed, this is not the time to be popping champagne corks. I've got an article here from offguardian.com. This is from Todd Hayen, and it's a very clear, dispassionate look at what they got and what we lost. And I guess the bottom line here is we still have some heavy lifting ahead of us. Todd Hayen says, "Stop the party, folks. It's not over until the fat lady sings, and she's only taking a break." Now, he says, "I've written about this premature euphoria several times, warning that we really haven't won a thing, not even one battle, until some heads roll. There are no rolling heads to be seen, not even a cursory fall guy having his career destroyed due to all the blame thrown his way." Now, he says, "I thought at first Fauci was going to get this honor with his mysterious disappearance as a precursor to his public fall from grace, but he says, I was wrong. He's only off somewhere private to lick his wounds, assuming he even considers himself wounded, which I rather doubt. No," he says, "we have won no battle, not even a skirmish. The enemy just backed off a bit. We woke up one morning, and they were gone. The hill we were supposedly fighting for was ours. Really, he says, it doesn't seem like both sides were fighting for the same hill. So what happened? Now he says, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. I think most of us have a pretty good idea what happened. The Ukraine-Russia incident makes clear the conditioning that COVID has accomplished over the population of the world. Suddenly, all of the focus shifted. Suddenly, a new enemy was in sight, much like enemies of old, at least an enemy we could see. It was actually quite astounding how quickly all the profile photos on Facebook changed from, I got vaccinated, to the blue and yellow flag of Ukraine. And so he says, as we stand on our deserted COVID hill, waving our own flag and wanting the enemy to at least acknowledge how clever we were to see through their lies and subterfuge, we wonder where everyone has gone. Yeah, we shout, we've won. Well, he says, no, we haven't. And not only have we not won, we have lost big time. Sorry to break it to you. And he says, like I said, I think most readers of Off Guardian know this. Maybe you can share this article with those who don't even know we were in a fight. It's beyond the scope of this article to list all the things they have won and all the things we have lost. But he says, I'm going to take a stab at the ones that stand out to me. First of all, he says, I think it's important to point out the things many of us think we have won, like the rescinding of the mandated mask wearing is the first example. Most states, provinces, and even whole countries have removed mask wearing in public as a rule, law, or regulation, or whatever you want to call it. In Canada, this is true as well. However, you must still wear a mask on public transit, in medical facilities, and quite a few other places. Why? Well, that's a ha-ha question. There never has been a reason why, and there isn't now. Even as this restriction has been removed, in quotation marks, many people are still wearing masks everywhere. Now, he says, I'm not sure how it is in other parts of the world, but here in Canada, there's quite a large percentage of people still wearing masks, even those walking outdoors or riding alone in their cars. This is the first example of what they got. Blind obedience to the cause, even when the cause has officially been announced as being no cause at all. Now, the fear was created. The high morality of following the authority for the good of the people has been established. A superstitious effect follows the fear. Wear a mask the same way everyone wears a talisman to ward off evil spirits, although that's probably more effective. Soon people won't even know why they first started wearing them. It's just a thing you do, like shaking hands when you meet someone, which we no longer do. Now, of course, the normies will say, well, why not? Why is wearing a mask so difficult to do? Need I explain why? When it's used as a form of compliance to authority, when wearing one obliterates one of the prime ways humans communicate and socialize, when it's actually medically dangerous to wear one, and when there's absolutely no reason to, then we should get rid of them as soon as we can and should never have worn them to begin with. So the powers that be ought not, or the powers that ought not to be, have won a very effective form of blind compliance, ready to implement at full force again with a snap of the finger. Not only are people still wearing them, it will take no effort at all to get a majority of the world's population to don them en masse again. Now, they've also won, and we have lost, a sense of unsubstantiated fear for our fellow human beings. Social distancing has forced us into an unconscious avoidance of other people. Now, he says, I haven't seen much handshaking going on or even hugging. People now avoid each other, and I doubt if these avoidances are even conscious. This has established a deep sense of fear and loss of trust, which again makes us all easily manipulated. It will only take small insertions in the culture through media to basically push us anywhere they want us pushed. Now, the breakdown of social psychology is clearly part of the agenda, and he says, I believe they can indeed count that one as a win, a big one. The implications of this sort of thing are unconscionable and range rather from a general disconnect from human interaction to massive unrest, impatience, and lack of tolerance. More violence, road rage, disputes, tribal dissonances, not to mention higher rates of depression, anxiety, drug use, suicide. If we think of Orwell's 1984 as any sort of a playbook for this agenda, we can see the foundations laid for many of the more atrocious aspects of Big Brother's world. The idea of continuous war raging somewhere in the world is certainly in place, along with the confusion of which side to be on at any given moment. The propaganda is relentless and leaves us all in a sticky, syrupy mess. Hate is an all-powerful stimulator for extreme nationalism and compliance to a singular narrative. During COVID, we were trained to accept nothing but one clearly defined truth. Different perspectives were not allowed, as anything with a different view was immediately labeled misinformation, fake, and dangerous. So there are no second opinions anymore. Either a source of information is in line with the mainstream or is simply degraded as insanity, moronic, or anti-science. There is no gray, only black and white. During COVID, we learned through a very conscious manipulation that there was only one way to see truth, and that polarized thinking can apply to anything the narrative wishes to apply it to. First, all about COVID and vaccines, now all about Ukraine and Russia. Two very different events in nearly every way, yet each with one mainstream view that we must all be in alignment with. Now, the ease of applying censorship to nearly any situation is a huge win for them. Any contrary opinion has been all but obliterated. If information is labeled mis by the mainstream, it's blocked. Contrary ideas and opinions on social media, deleted. Those who are brave enough to speak out lose their jobs and their reputations are ruined. Once we start marching to this drum that anything that challenges the mainstream narrative is false, fake, misinformation, dangerous, or anti-science, we are quite literally walking into a totalitarian state. After COVID, this sort of censorship will be just that much easier to implement, and it will be that much easier to just go along with it, or worse, to advocate it. I mean, in more subtle areas, we see the foundation set for other agenda items like central bank digital currency, digital IDs, paving the way for that's been paved the way they've had the way paved for them rather by vaccine passports, and the ground they've acquired through COVID manipulation is clear and substantial. Depending on how far down the rabbit hole you're willing to go, we're also seeing the tiny tip of the iceberg with thousands of deaths and injuries undoubtedly caused by the vaccines. Probably the effect that the makers of the injection see as a minor annoyance, when the major event could very well be millions of deaths spread out over generations. Now, if that's true, that's a big win for them and a big loss for us. So really, he says we have won nothing, at least yet. And the foundation has been poured for a structure. We don't know the final shape of it, but it's definitely going to be blocking our view of freedom and creativity. The advice here is stay on that hill. The battle has only begun. Do not give up, whatever you do.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.